Young student faces. Discrimination at bank. Mother's identity brings justice. On a bright Monday morning, 14-year-old Jasmine Porter entered the elegant Oak Ridge Bank. Wearing her school uniform consisting of a blazer, skirt, and dress shoes, Jasmine experienced a mix of anxiety and pride. She was about to complete her first independent banking transaction, depositing a $5,000 scholarship check she had received for her exceptional academic achievements. The funds represented her dedication and hard work, while also marking a step toward personal autonomy. She was resolved to complete this task independently, without parental assistance. Jasmine walked up to the counter with her check, her pulse quickening as she held her document folder tightly. From behind the counter, the bank manager, Victoria Hayes, a woman approaching 50 with refined attire and a condescending demeanor, observed Jasmine's entrance. Her expression immediately became stern. When Jasmine presented the check, Victoria's professional demeanor wavered momentarily. A $5,000 check? Victoria's tone elevated enough for other patrons to notice. For someone your age? What's the source of this money? Jasmine felt warmth spread across her face, but quickly composed herself. It's from my academic scholarship, she responded calmly, though her hands shook slightly as she provided the award documentation and student identification. I have all the necessary paperwork here. The teller, a young employee named Tom, accepted the check from her, his expression changing from neutral to doubtful. He examined it against the light, scrutinizing it like an investigator looking for evidence. After several lengthy moments, he consulted Victoria, who had been observing the exchange with increasing doubt. Victoria approached the counter without acknowledging Jasmine directly. We've encountered numerous counterfeit checks lately, she muttered with evident contempt. I'll need to authenticate everything. Jasmine's worry intensified. She had anticipated a straightforward deposit, but now found herself treated like a suspect. She checked her bag and realized with growing alarm that her mobile phone remained in her school locker. I need to contact my mother, Jasmine said, her voice slightly breaking. She's waiting for me to return home. I don't have my phone with me? Victoria hardly looked at her. That's not our concern, she replied curtly and dismissively. You'll remain here until we complete our verification procedures. The statement was hurtful. Jasmine remained motionless as Victoria turned away, her every movement radiating superiority. The bank manager moved to a corner, crossing her arms and wearing a self-satisfied expression as she watched Jasmine standing in the crowded lobby. Jasmine's heart raised as she was left standing, isolated, unable to leave. Around her, the bank's activity continued normally, yet she felt as though everyone was staring at her. Murmurs started among other customers, some looking her way with obvious curiosity, others with barely hidden disapproval. She remained there for what seemed like hours. As time progressed, her embarrassment only intensified. Each moment felt endless, the marble flooring beneath her becoming colder with every passing minute. Despite her circumstances, Jasmine's intellect remained alert. She had always been perceptive, noting how people treated one another, the subtle variations in service, how some individuals received respectful treatment while others were overlooked or dismissed. She had witnessed this before, but today she was experiencing it firsthand. She wanted to protest, to demand her documents back, but she stayed quiet. Her father had taught her to maintain dignity when facing challenges, yet she couldn't escape the sense that her treatment had nothing to do with her scholarship's validity and everything to do with her appearance. From across the room, Jasmine overheard Victoria speaking quietly with Tom in almost secretive tones. I'm telling you, we must uphold our standards, Victoria declared. We can't allow just anyone to enter and expect to be treated as if they belong here. Jasmine's spirits fell. The words felt like a physical blow. She was being evaluated not for her character, but for her looks. Her hands formed fists, and she struggled to maintain her composure. She had earned this scholarship through hard work. She had deserved it completely, and now it seemed to be slipping from her grasp. She glanced at the wall clock. More time elapsed. The whispers persisted. All she could do now was wait. Jasmine Porter wasn't an ordinary teenager. Despite residing in Oak Ridge's most prestigious area, she had always preferred simplicity to extravagance. Her family's residence was refined but modest. No flashy wealth displays, just elegantly furnished rooms and a strong community spirit. Jasmine's mother, Dr. Naomi Porter, was a distinguished financial consultant who operated one of the nation's most respected companies. As someone who had built her career independently, Naomi had taught Jasmine strong self-reliance and the belief that genuine success stemmed from effort, not privilege. The Porter family's wealth was considerable but never flaunted. Dr. Naomi Porter valued education and determination. She frequently reminded Jasmine that wealth wasn't merely about accumulating money, but using it for positive purposes. Jasmine had internalized these teachings, excelling academically and earning a complete scholarship to Westridge Academy, a prestigious institution renowned for academic rigor. This wasn't a gift handed to her easily. Jasmine had worked relentlessly, earning her scholarship through merit rather than her mother's reputation. Her peers often admired her ability to balance studies, activities, and part-time employment. But Jasmine didn't mind. She welcomed the challenge. It was her method of proving to herself and others that she could succeed independently. Her mother had always been supportive naturally, but never permitted Jasmine to take easy paths. I want you to have the same opportunities as others, Naomi would explain, but I also want you to stand independently. Jasmine's choice to handle her banking alone was another step toward independence. She was 14 but felt prepared to navigate the adult world. The scholarship check, representing her hard work's culmination, seemed like a symbol of her developing maturity. Earlier that morning, before visiting the bank, Jasmine had carefully placed the check in her folder. Her mother had been sitting at the breakfast table reviewing her firm's financial documents, but paused to smile at Jasmine. Are you certain you don't want me to accompany you? Naomi asked warmly, though with slight concern. I can handle it, Mom, Jasmine responded with quiet confidence. I'm 14 now. It's time I learned to manage this independently. Her mother had nodded, her eyes showing pride. Naomi knew Jasmine was completely capable, yet couldn't help worrying. It was maternal instinct, the urge to protect her child from harm, especially when the world could sometimes be cruel and unfair. Jasmine had reassured her, I'll be fine. I'll go in, make the deposit, and return before you finish your meeting. It had seemed like such a simple task. Jasmine never expected that simply entering a bank to deposit a scholarship check would result in such an ordeal. As she waited in the bank's corner, Jasmine couldn't help reflecting on her mother's teachings. She had always been raised to believe in fairness and equality, to treat people respectfully, and to expect the same treatment. But standing there, isolated and humiliated, she realized the world didn't always follow the same principles. Jasmine had been forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that her appearance, her race, influenced how she was treated. It wasn't something she had fully grasped before today. Growing up in Oak Ridge, she had never experienced discrimination like this. Certainly, she had heard about it, read about it in books, but it always seemed distant, theoretical. Today, it was her reality. She looked at the clock again, her anxiety mounting. She had already waited far too long. Her mind raced. Why hadn't anyone checked on her? Why was she still standing in the corner when all she had done was bring a legitimate check to deposit? The longer she remained there, the more she felt the situation's weight pressing on her shoulders. Her mother would expect her home soon. She needed to call her, but that too was refused. Time moved slowly in the corner where Jasmine stood, the situation's weight bearing down on her. The marble floors felt cold under her feet, and the wall clock's constant ticking seemed to amplify her growing isolation. People entered and left, but no one addressed her. She was merely an invisible presence, a source of silent judgment in the busy bank's heart. As Jasmine stood there, her thoughts began racing. She observed the other customers, some receiving obvious preferential treatment. A well-dressed elderly couple entered, greeted warmly and respectfully by Victoria Hayes, who personally escorted them to a VIP section. Jasmine never received such acknowledgement. It was as if she didn't belong in this space of polished marble and mahogany wood. Minutes later, a young man with a thick accent approached the counter with paperwork. Victoria, who had been watching him from across the room, immediately dismissed him with a wave. Sorry, the system is slow today. It'll take time to process your request, she said indifferently. Jasmine watched, her stomach dropping as the man left, clearly frustrated. Yet, when a white couple entered moments later with similar documents, Victoria's attitude completely changed. She practically glowed as she guided them to the front. Of course, let me handle that immediately, she said smoothly and eagerly. You're in excellent hands here. Jasmine's chest tightened with anger and disbelief. This wasn't merely a mistake, it wasn't just poor service. This was something more sinister, something deeply rooted in prejudice. She knew exactly what was occurring. Victoria was selecting who to treat respectfully, and she had made clear that Jasmine didn't belong. Her hands clenched at her sides as she forced herself to remain still, refusing to let her emotions overflow. She had seen this behavior before. Subtle, insidious discrimination disguised as customer service, but never had she felt it so personally, so painfully. It was as if the entire bank had turned against her simply because of her skin color. Victoria's voice cut through the air again, this time addressing the security guard near Jasmine. Watch her, she instructed coolly and authoritatively. Make sure she doesn't attempt to leave. Jasmine's heart pounded. She had to resist the urge to shout about the injustice. Instead, she focused on breathing, trying to stay calm, trying to block out the pain that threatened to overwhelm her. She had been taught to handle difficult situations gracefully, but today, everything felt different. Today she was trapped in a system that didn't see her as a person but as an inconvenience. Minutes stretched into hours. The only sounds were occasional paper rustling, distant polite conversation, and the sharp clicking of Victoria's heels on marble floors. Jasmine couldn't escape the feeling of being watched, that everyone in the bank was observing her, judging her. The murmurs grew louder, more frequent. Jasmine could hear conversation fragments, snide comments, pitying whispers, and a few barely concealed laughs. She felt small. She felt powerless. The worst part, she wasn't sure anyone cared. No one had defended her. No one had questioned why she was being treated this way. It was as though her suffering was invisible to them, just background noise in a world that had learned to ignore injustice. Then, just as Jasmine's mind was beginning to unravel from the situation's sheer weight, something caught her attention. Victoria was speaking to Tom, the teller, in hushed tones, her face tight with frustration. "Why is she still here?" Victoria asked, barely whispering. "We need to remove her. Make sure she understands she's not welcome." Jasmine's stomach dropped. She had heard enough. Victoria's words confirmed what she had feared all along. This wasn't just about a misplaced check or a minor error. It was about something much darker. It was about power, control, and the assumption that people like Jasmine didn't belong in spaces like this. She was an outsider, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. As Victoria turned away, Jasmine couldn't stop herself from speaking up. "I'm not a problem," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "I'm here because I earned this scholarship. I'm here to deposit my check just like everyone else." Victoria didn't even look in her direction. Instead, she turned to the security guard, her voice low and commanding. "Take her to the back. Keep her there until we finish the paperwork." The security guard, a large man with an intimidating presence, approached Jasmine without hesitation. His hand gripped her arm firmly, and he began escorting her across the bank floor. Every eye in the room turned to watch, but no one intervened. Jasmine felt blood rush to her face as she was forcibly led away from the teller counter, her heart racing with anger and humiliation. "Stand here," the guard ordered, positioning her in a corner near the room's back where she was visible to everyone but out of the way. He stepped back, his eyes scanning the room, ensuring she stayed in place. Jasmine stood there, her arms crossed over her chest, her back straight and her head held high, but inside, she was falling apart. As Jasmine stood in the corner, her body aching from hours of forced stillness, her thoughts began to spiral. The situation's harsh reality weighed heavily on her. She had been humiliated, treated like an outcast in a place where she had expected fair treatment. Every passing minute seemed to stretch forever, and the longer she was forced to wait, the more she realized something was deeply wrong. Jasmine's eyes moved around the bank, searching for something, anything, that might distract from the overwhelming sense of injustice. Her gaze landed on the manager, Victoria Hayes, who had been moving around the room, her heels clicking sharply against marble floors. She was speaking to a well-dressed man, tall and imposing, whom Jasmine didn't initially recognize, but something about his manner seemed familiar. He was someone important, and judging by how Victoria was speaking to him, he was someone she was eager to please. The man's name clicked in Jasmine's mind like a bell: Harrison Wells. The name had been mentioned by her mother before in passing when discussing business rivalries. Harrison Wells was the CEO of Meridian Banking Group, one of the largest competitors to the bank her mother had recently acquired. Jasmine's pulse quickened as she watched the exchange between Victoria and Wells. She wasn't close enough to hear their conversation clearly, but she could tell it was something serious. Victoria leaned toward Wells, her voice lowering to nearly a whisper as she handed him a manila folder. Jasmine's heart raced as she observed the interaction. The folder was clearly marked confidential, and though she couldn't determine the contents, it was obvious that whatever was inside was important. Jasmine's mind was reeling. She had seen her mother work for years, building the bank's trust and reputation, and she knew that any confidentiality breach could be catastrophic. This was no simple business meeting. This was something more, a betrayal in development. She shifted slightly in her corner, straining to hear more, but her position was far from ideal. Still, she kept her eyes locked on the two figures. Wells nodded as he reviewed the folder, his expression serious, even pleased. He said something to Victoria, his words too quiet to make out, but the smile that spread across her face told Jasmine everything she needed to know. Victoria wasn't just helping Wells. She was actively working against her own company, her own employer. Jasmine's stomach churned. It was becoming clearer by the second. Victoria wasn't just mistreating her because of her race or age. She was using her bank position to sabotage it. Jasmine had no idea what was in that folder, but she knew it wasn't good, and she knew it related to her mother's company. She felt a sudden surge of determination, no longer just a passive observer. Jasmine understood she had to act. She wasn't just here to deposit a check anymore. She had stumbled upon something much bigger, something that could affect her mother's life and career. She couldn't just stand idly by. Her eyes moved down to the leather-bound notebook she always carried. She had taken notes throughout her time at the bank, documenting the discriminatory treatment she had witnessed. But this was different. This was critical. Actually, she had to document everything she had seen, every detail, every whisper. Jasmine had no idea what she could do with the information, but she knew she had to keep a record. She had to be prepared. As Victoria and Wells continued their hushed conversation, Jasmine quickly opened her notebook, her fingers trembling as she wrote. She noted the time, the suspicious folder, everything she had observed in those few moments. The conversation between the two ended abruptly when Wells stood to leave. Victoria shook his hand with a smile, her demeanor almost too eager. Jasmine's heart pounded as Wells walked past her toward the exit, his footsteps heavy with purpose. Once he was gone, Victoria returned to her usual position behind the counter, but her smile was gone. She was focused, her attention now entirely on Jasmine, who remained standing in the corner. Jasmine felt a shiver run down her spine. It was as if Victoria knew she had witnessed everything. Jasmine's thoughts raced. She had seen enough to know that something sinister was happening behind the scenes. But what could she do with this information? How could she prove what had happened? Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand, determination setting in. She had been wronged, yes, but now she had a chance to make things right, not just for herself, but for her mother, for her family, and for everyone else who had been unfairly treated by Victoria Hayes. Jasmine wouldn't let this go. Jasmine stood silently as the situation's weight bore down on her. Hours of waiting, hours of humiliation had built to this moment. She had been wronged, treated as though she didn't belong, but now she had something far more valuable than her check or documents. She had the truth, and it was time to make that truth known. As if summoned by her thoughts, the bank doors opened, and in walked her mother, Naomi Porter. Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. Naomi's presence was magnetic. She was calm, composed, and dressed impeccably, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded in the bank. Victoria Hayes, who had been overseeing Jasmine's ordeal, stood up straight as soon as she saw Naomi. "Miss Porter," Victoria greeted her, her voice dripping with feigned politeness. "I wasn't expecting you today. How can I help you?" But Naomi didn't respond with pleasantries. She turned immediately to Jasmine, her eyes narrowing, as she took in the sight of her daughter standing alone, still isolated in the corner. A flash of anger crossed Naomi's face before she masked it with a calm exterior. "Jasmine, are you okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. Jasmine nodded, fighting to keep her emotions in check. "I'm fine, Mom," she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts inside her. "But there's something you need to know." Jasmine pulled out her leather-bound notebook and began recounting everything she had observed during her time in the bank. The preferential treatment shown to white customers, the cold indifference shown to her, and most importantly, the conversation between Victoria and Harrison Wells. She read aloud from her notes, her voice unwavering as she recounted the suspicious meeting and the confidential folder. Naomi listened intently, her face hardening with each word. When Jasmine finished, Naomi turned to Victoria, her gaze sharp. "Ms. Hayes," Naomi said, her tone icy, "I believe you owe my daughter an apology, and I think you owe me an explanation." Victoria's confident facade began to crack. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but Naomi cut her off. "I know exactly what you've been doing," Naomi replied, her voice controlled but firm. "You've been conspiring with Harrison Wells, handing over confidential information to a competitor. This isn't just a case of poor customer service, this is corporate espionage." The bank fell silent. No one moved. Jasmine watched as Victoria's face turned pale, her composure crumbling under the weight of Naomi's words. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but couldn't find the words. Naomi didn't give her the chance. "You're fired, Ms. Hayes," she said, uttering effective immediately. The words landed with a finality that seemed to echo throughout the bank. Security was called, and the large guard who had earlier escorted Jasmine to the corner now moved toward Victoria. "Please escort Ms. Hayes out," Naomi instructed. As Victoria was led away, her pride fully shattered, Naomi turned back to the room. "This institution will undergo a review," Naomi said, her voice commanding. "We will implement changes to ensure that no one is treated with the same disrespect my daughter was today." No one. The room was still. Jasmine's heart beat steadily in her chest as she watched her mother take control of the situation, her strength a pillar Jasmine had always admired. The next few months were a blur of changes at the bank. The investigation into Victoria's actions uncovered not only her attempts to sabotage Naomi's business, but also a pattern of discriminatory behavior. The bank's leadership was overhauled, and a new training program on equitable banking practices was put in place. As for Tom, the young teller who had shown Jasmine kindness during her ordeal, he was promoted to a managerial role. Jasmine's experience became a turning point not just for the bank, but for her as well. She was invited to speak at Westridge Academy, where she shared her story with other students. Jasmine used her voice to advocate for financial literacy and the importance of equality in all spaces. Standing before her peers, she smiled, knowing that her painful experience had shaped her into someone who could stand up for others. She had turned her moment of humiliation into a platform for change, and her mother's example had taught her that even in the face of injustice, it was possible to make a difference. If you found this story meaningful, consider subscribing to stay updated with more inspiring content about overcoming challenges and standing up for what's right.